Brooklyn, New York, 2006. The body of a young woman is discovered on waste ground. She's been raped and then strangled.
She had her hands tied behind her back. She had her feet tied.
Within weeks, police have honed in on a prime suspect.
He was suggesting to them in various times that he was some sort of bounty hunter.
But despite some forensic evidence, they can't link him directly to the murder. When others come forward, police begin to piece together an extraordinary picture.
Same thing, someone impressed upon themselves that they were law enforcement, they put her in a van, they take her to a location.
And it's all based on DNA.
It was a great feeling to realize that we could take this particular sample that was more or less an unknown and be able to link that to something that became probative.
This is the story of Imette St Guillen, her tragic death, and how she lived her last minutes.
It's the juxtaposition of those acts against who she was that is very hard to fathom, that somebody could be so brutal.
New York City, February 2006. Police receive an anonymous 911 call from the Lindenwood Diner, Brooklyn. Officers are dispatched.
When they got there, they found a wrapped up body. The body was dumped in a rather desolate area of Brooklyn.
The officers then called the local detectives.
Myself and my partner arrived at the 7-5 crime scene. Detective squad was present at the scene. They fill us in on what they observed, what they found, if anything. It was a woman wrapped up. She was naked. She was wrapped up in a quilt.
Once that was opened and removed, it was clear that the victim, who was a female, had been naked otherwise. There was no clothing on her whatsoever.
She had her hands tied behind her back. She had her feet tied.
She actually had 3 zip ties used to bind her back. So one was on one wrist, one was on the other wrist, and then the 3rd zip tie combined or connected the 2 zip ties to each other, and they were locked and bound.
And she had packing tape from over her eyes and below her mouth, covering her face.
The location where the body had been found was out of the way.
The area where the body had been dumped, the landfill area, is very desolate, abandoned.
The area is known predominantly for a large parkway that wraps around the entire borough of Brooklyn and goes into Queens, called the Belt Parkway. The body was found probably about 50 feet off the corner and maybe 20 feet or so off the sidewalk. The land itself was completely undeveloped. It was just brush. It had never been anything other than a vacant lot.
But while the area was desolate, the crime scene appeared to be a potentially rich source of forensic material.
It's like an onion. You peel in a layer and you go little by little.
You don't know what you have other than what appears to be a homicide, obviously because of the restraints and how the body is discarded. So you're going to take the blanket, you're going to take the zip ties, you're going to take the sock, you're going to collect the duct tape, you're going to gather anything near the body, such as the snow brush, things like that, because this is the very early stages of the investigation, so you don't know what is evidence or you don't know what may have probative value down the line.
Detectives now began to construct their investigation.
So that initial night, we just tried to find out where the 911 call was made. That call was made at the Lindenwood Diner. We responded to the diner after the crime scene, see if there was any video. Unfortunately, that camera where it would have shown the person on the phone was not working. So at that point, we did a short canvass around the neighborhood for cameras, see if there was any surveillance video anywhere. But other than that, there wasn't much to do at this point. She had no identification, so now we have to go step by step, and the next step would be do the autopsy.
The medical examiner was able to determine the cause of death as asphyxiation.
We know she had a sock stuffed down her throat while she was still alive. and the medical evidence established she was alive when that was done. Secondly, she was completely wrapped in tape, obstructing not only her mouth but her nose, which would have clearly made breathing very difficult. And finally, there was evidence, not of a complete strangulation, but that there was evidence that force had been applied to her neck that would have resulted in her inability to both breathe and the inability of blood to travel from the heart to the brain. So the asphyxiation is a conclusion based upon multiple different things that the medical examiner observed.
The toxicology report also revealed specifics about the condition of the woman when she had died.
The standard in New York at the time, for example, for driving while intoxicated would be a 0.08% alcohol. She, in fact, had slightly more than double that at 0.17 in her bloodstream, and even more was found in the samples taken from her eye. So she was, by any definition, intoxicated or drunk.
It tells you that she had stopped drinking anywhere between 1 to 3 hours before her death.
The medical report also showed that the dead woman had fought for her life.
Any person subjected to what she was subjected to would have struggled and fought. We know that the sock was placed down her mouth while she was still alive. It's hard to imagine that she could have successfully resisted this. But I'm sure, just given the nature of human beings, that when put in the situation she was, handcuffed from behind and having a sock put down your throat, I can't imagine that she wouldn't have tried her best.
Police now needed to identify the woman.
The body was found Saturday evening, and sometime overnight, the police department let know to the local tabloid press that there had been a body discovered. The Daily News, the New York Daily News, posted a story which indicated that a body had been found.
You treat it as a missing person. You put out that you have this body, and if anyone has any information that can help identify this person, please reach out to the police. Please contact law enforcement authorities. If you're missing anyone or if you recognize anything about this person.
The trawl for information was quick to yield a positive result.
The family had happened to read that a young woman was discovered by the Bell Parkway. This person's family member had not been home since the night before. So they were worried, and they had no reason to believe it was or wasn't her, but they wanted to double check like anybody else would.
And the person who called about the deceased had more information to offer.
Something caught the detective's ear while he was talking to this young woman, because what she said was that her missing friend, Imette St Guillen, had just returned from a vacation in Florida. And the investigating detective had noticed, this was February in New York City when most people don't have tans, that there had been tan lines on the victim indicating perhaps that the woman had been out of town getting a tan. And so put two and two together, and because of that fact, he suggested that this young woman come to the precinct.
My job is then to show a picture. We have a picture from the autopsy of just the face, nothing else. And we asked the person, do you recognize this person or not? And she was obviously distraught. So now we have a place to go. I can't find out who killed you unless I know who you are. So now we know the person was Imette St Guillen.
Imette St Guillen was a young woman in her early 20s. She was born and raised in Boston. She was clearly a bright young woman. She'd gone on to college, and post-college, she had moved to New York to seek a graduate degree in criminal justice, ironically, from the leading school in New York City in criminal justice, which is part of the City University system, John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And she was a graduate student there at the time of her death.
Just this vibrant, committed, full of life young woman who just had a sense that the future was bright and that she was going to do great things and make a difference in people's lives. And that made her murder even harder to bear because it was the loss of that future.
Unfortunately, I met a lot of victims in death that I wish I would have met in life. And I was introduced to them through their families, and you talk to the families and you hear about things that they had done in their communities, things they had done for their communities, goals they had set for themselves in life. And then you realize, but for one committing a crime against them, that was all snatched away. It was snatched away from the victim, but it was also snatched away from society. Imette St Guillen would have been a huge asset to society.
Imette's contribution to society was not to be, and as they began hunting for the man who killed her, police knew they were hunting for a ruthless, dangerous killer, someone who, if not caught, could strike again.
It was getting worse by the day, every victim we found, and there could be more victims out there that we don't know about.
Initially, there was no suspect. The universe was a suspect. So they're looking at who were her boyfriends, who were her friends, who were the people that wanted to be her boyfriend and wasn't.
Once you know who, then you got to figure out where. So you have to then backtrack. Try to figure out where had this victim been the previous 24 to 48 hours, if possible. So at that point, you're gonna try to check cell phone records, see who she had called, who she had been with. You're gonna check credit card records. You're gonna try to see if she made any purchases. Talk to friends that she had been with to try to figure out what were the last hours of this person's life.
Police now tried to do just that.
Her friend Claire was with her the night before.
Claire and Imette had just been away on holiday together.
So they met up with a bunch of friends in a bar called the Pioneer Bar. At that point, they were just casual young girl night out, meeting people, meeting guys, hanging out with friends, and then it started to get late. Claire was super tired from being away, but Imette wanted to still go out.
Claire wound up hailing a cab and getting in the cab, and Imette refused to get in the cab, and they let that one go, and eventually a second cab was flagged. And at each time, Claire was trying to convince Imette it was time to go home and end the evening, and Imette wanted none of that. And finally, in frustration, Claire just said, well, I'm going home, and left Imette on her own in the vicinity of the Pioneer Bar on the Bowery in Lower Manhattan.
That was the last time Claire saw Imette alive, and Claire was the last person the detectives knew of who had seen her.
Claire Higgins, I felt a lot of sympathy for, because here was a woman who blamed herself. Blamed herself because she felt that through some shape, form, or fashion, she should have gotten Imette to go with her. Trust me, she tried. From talking with her, you could tell she tried. She did everything she could.
Imette's credit card details revealed she'd been to another bar after she left Claire.
She had bought 2 rum and cokes with her credit card, and that's how we knew she was there. She could have went to other places afterwards, we don't know, but then that's the next step you go to. Any new information you have, you take that step and take that lead and you work on it. So the next step was, let's go to the Falls Bar.
The Falls Bar was nowhere near what I would characterize as a dive bar. It was a bar that probably attracted more young people than anything else. It served food, it had a kitchen. It was a popular space for, I guess, young people, perhaps in their 20s and 30s, to congregate, and it was popular at the time from what I gathered.
You asked for surveillance video. There was none at the Falls Bar. You asked to speak to the owner, the bartenders, every employee that was working. Do you recognize this girl? Show them pictures. Do you remember this person there or not there? Just start building your case. Unfortunately, the owner, when we originally talked to him, stated she wasn't in the bar, or that he doesn't remember her being in the bar. I don't know if he was trying to throw us off for a bad reason because he had some involvement, or we ended up finding out later is because he had a lot of issues, didn't want the police in his bar.
The staff members, however, were more forthcoming.
They certainly immediately interviewed all 3 of the bartenders that were working that day. They tried to determine who the bouncers were that night. They spoke to a guy who was a porter or the cleanup guy.
What's the next thing you remember about her? What was the next thing that happened?
Well, the next thing that happened is like somebody told her that she had to go because I was already over before and she can't stay, from the bar drinking.
So what happened?
She said Like, okay. You know, seconds pass and she's like still there, you know, she's still there sitting.
She didn't leave?
We later on find out that she didn't want to leave because she had ordered the 2 drinks, but it was time to go.
Which direction did you go?
I went left.
And where were the two of they? Where was B and where was the girl at the time when you left?
I have no idea. I just turned around and walked.
But before you turned around, where were they?
Oh, they were just standing in front of the door.
The two of them?
Yeah. I think she was putting on a gloves and scarf or something.
Okay.
One of the people interviewed was a bouncer called Daryl Littlejohn.
Daryl Littlejohn, understand, was one of many people interviewed, and there was no reason initially to suspect him. When he was first interviewed, he gave his correct name and address, and I believe his cell phone number to the police, and said he didn't recall her being there at all.
It was a busy night. He doesn't recall whether or not she was there. She might have been, he didn't know.
But Littlejohn's story was different when detectives spoke to him again.
Second visit to the falls, he indicated, I believe, that he might have recognized her picture in the paper when it was published as somebody who was in the bar, and did not indicate any particular contact with her beyond that.
Later, he would say she had been there. He escorted her out because that's what part of his job is, to get the stragglers out, get them out of the location. Because otherwise, if they're there after closing time, the bar can be fined. So he merely escorted her out.
And this version of events was confirmed by others.
From our witnesses in the bar, the last view they had was of Littlejohn walking Imette down the hallway to the front door. They don't know which direction she went, which direction he went.
The Falls Bar now became the main focus of the police investigation.
We continue our interviews with everybody in the bar. We take DNA from everybody in the bar. Littlejohn seems to stick out as not cooperative. He's a little bit combative. He tells other bouncers, I'm not giving them my DNA, which then they tell us later on. So now we're kind of focusing on him a little bit. Like, why is he acting, why is he hinked up if he has nothing to worry about, nothing to hide? And they had told us that Littlejohn and a partner of his that were doing security would pretend they were U.S. Marshals.
And again, what the police were being told seemed somewhat confusing.
They weren't precisely sure what agency he worked for, but he was suggesting to them in various times that he was some sort of bounty hunter.
Sometimes it was an air marshal, sometimes a U.S. Marshal, sometimes it was an FBI agent. And he had vests and raid jackets and handcuffs and flashlights.
He had a badge that he would wear around his neck and impress upon people that he was in law enforcement.
Kind of gave the aura or impression that he was in that business without necessarily him ever showing any real identification or anything that would have established what agency he worked for or who he worked for.
He kind of stood out to us from the beginning.
Police felt they needed to learn more about the mysterious Daryl Littlejohn.
We did obviously do background checks, criminal history checks, find out what telephones he's using or emails. We do backgrounds on those. Come to find out that he's been arrested almost half of his life for various crimes, and they're all bad crimes, either robberies, assaults, bank robberies, very serious crimes. So he's done time, he's a bad guy. When the phone records come back, we do cell site searches, and we find that he's in the area at the same time that Imette is found.
We got a court order to get Daryl Littlejohn's cell phone records. That I would characterize as the first really significant evidence in the case.
And a witness on his way to work was able to offer some more information.
The night that Imette was found, the security guard was going to work. He took the bus, he got dropped off at the bus. He walks a pretty long way to where the facility is. He happens to remember a minivan parked on the side of the road where he walked past.
That witness said that he saw a person in the driver's seat and a light emanating from what he assumed to be a cell phone. So that means at that time, somebody presumably was using the cell phone in that area.
People go down there either to buy drugs or to hang out with a girl. So you're not really supposed to be on that street. You have no reason to unless you park there for a certain reason. So if somebody's walking by, they want to look to see why you're there, because there's no reason for you to be there. There's nothing around there.
Police were able to run a cellular tower cross-reference check with Littlejohn's phone.
you create a geo map. You try to figure out, okay, let's trace his steps from the bar throughout that night. And then based on cell phone technology, you have him at the bar. Then you have him going to Queens.
And there came a time when his cell phone left the area, the vicinity of where he lived, and traveled in the direction or along the vicinity of the Belt Parkway from Queens, where he lived, into the place where, roughly speaking, the body had been found. And there were a couple of calls in particular that he had not made, but that he had received from someone he was not expecting to talk to, that were very crucial in their timing.
You know, in law enforcement, you don't believe in coincidences. And, you know, when you see an investigative lead like this, the next step is to try to figure out, okay, where else is that phone hanging at?
The night the body was found, he's on his phone at his house. He's on his phone in the Belt Parkway. He's still on his phone at where the body is dumped. Still on his phone on the way back home, and still on the phone when he gets back home.
Police were focusing almost exclusively on Daryl Littlejohn.
Phone records certainly established that he was a principal suspect at this point, but we had nothing else.
Given the fact that the cell phone evidence was a huge piece of evidence, and now we start to focus on him. Start to surveil him 24/7. Focus on his family, any girlfriends, any friends, anybody we could talk to, his whereabouts, anything we can do to see if he's being truthful or not when it's time to talk to him. So we want to know as much about him as possible before we talk to him.
Littlejohn, it transpired, had a dark criminal past.
He had an extensive criminal record, including a history of felony convictions. And he was on parole at the time of the commission of this crime.
When you're on parole, one of the things you cannot do is work as a bouncer at an after-hour joint. I don't believe he had permission of his parole officer to do that at the time.
And the parole department decided that they were going to take him into custody and hold him until such time as they could hold a parole revocation hearing. Now that proved to be helpful to us and significant for the following reason. Phone records certainly established that he was a principal suspect at this point, but we had nothing else.
The investigators needed to gather more detailed forensic information.
Collectively, we found a drop of blood on the zip ties that were found around Imette's wrists.
Specifically in the locking mechanism of one of the 3 zip ties, had a tiny speck of blood which would have been smaller than the head of a pin.
But the head of a pin was more than enough.
And the result from the DNA profile that was created from that blood stain on the zip tie that was used to bound and tie Imette St Guillen came back to Daryl Littlejohn. And that's a wow. That was a wow.
We found his blood, not could be his blood, not might be his blood, not probably his blood. It was his blood.
It's his DNA in a place that there's no legitimate reason for it to be there, but for one reason. And that's because he used the zip tie to bound her, and during that, nicked himself and left a blood stain.
If he's bleeding, there had to have been some type of struggle. So the violent nature of the way it appeared that she died, he had to have gotten cut. We were definitely on the right track.
The blood on the zip ties really was, I believe, a pivotal moment in the case. Up till that point, I think there were a number of leads and suspects. And then finding that blood that matched Daryl Littlejohn really pushed, I believe, the prosecutors and the police to move forward with charges against him.
The investigators also wanted to know more about a snow brush found at the scene where Imette's body was discovered.
The thing about the snow brush that was so nice is it was just sitting there. No one had any idea whether it was connected to the case or not, but the police took it.
The snow brush also had touch DNA that matched Daryl Littlejohn's DNA profile.
The degree to which it came back as Daryl's was absolutely inconsistent with being planted on that stick. It was completely consistent with somebody who had taken his hand and used that stick to maybe brush snow off a car or something. Even though it didn't point as directly to Darryl as the drop of blood did, to me it was much more probative in some respects because it was impossible to imagine that that could have possibly been planted.
There was even more evidence to be extracted from the quilt found at the scene.
We also found a semen stain on the quilt that her body was wrapped in. And we received some hair that was found on the quilt by the NYPD, and that hair was also tested for DNA.
So far, so good. But the next sample that investigators examined threw up an unexpected surprise.
We initially got a result from the semen that appeared to be degraded, which means that the semen was either very old or just poor quality in some way. And so initially, we didn't know what to do with that. It did not match Darryl Littlejohn, and so we just kind of thought that didn't have anything to do with the crime.
It wasn't Darryl Littlejohn's, and we had no idea whose it was. And since this had clearly been a sex crimes case, the natural inclination of any observer studying this evidence would tend to think that the person whose semen is on there may very well be responsible for her rape and homicide. And it wasn't Littlejohn, so it was a problem for me.
But after some time, the sample began to make some sense.
After examining that DNA profile a little more closely, I found that there were a lot of similar characteristics in that profile to Darryl Littlejohn.
The forensics investigators now contacted the detectives.
Taylor Dickerson gave me a phone call. Ken, I've been looking at these samples, and I firmly believe that the contributor to the DNA sample on the bedspread, the semen that was decomposing, belonged to a full brother of Darryl Littlejohn. And so the next question he asked me was, does Darryl Littlejohn have a brother? And I said, I have no idea. Let me find out.
But Darryl Littlejohn did have a brother. He had been in prison, and he was deceased.
In fact, he had died of some sort of asthma attack while he was incarcerated. But the beauty of it was that they had done an autopsy. The medical examiner's office actually kept a binder with a bunch of glass slides of tissue samples taken from Darryl Littlejohn's brother at the time they had performed the autopsy on him. And lo and behold, it was a full brother of Darryl Littlejohn, and it was an exact match to the old semen on the blanket.
It was a great feeling to realize that we could take this particular sample that was more or less an unknown throughout the beginning part of the case and be able to link that to something that became probative then for the case.
For the detectives, the blanket offered another connection.
Another linkage showing that this is Darryl Littlejohn. This is his quilt. This is his family. This is where the evidence is taking you. You know, again, as a prosecutor, as an investigator, you go where the evidence takes you. And again, all of these things now are piling up.
And there was more forensic evidence on the quilt. Some hair. So who did that belong to?
Because mitochondrial DNA is related by your maternal side, it had to be his aunt or his mother or his sister. What we did is we got a sample from his aunt who lived in New York, and it was not her. Then we learned that Darryl Littlejohn's mother was now living in South Carolina in a nursing home. So with the assistance of South Carolina prosecutors, we got a search warrant to go to her and take a little swab from the cheek of her to get DNA from her.
The DNA underwent a forensic test.
It turned out that that hair, which by the way turned out to be a pubic hair, was in fact from Darryl Littlejohn's mother. But again, in a way, it's almost better evidence because it's showing a connection to Darryl Littlejohn that's not direct.
The team also needed to match fibers taken from Imette's body, a red carpet fiber and some rabbit and mink hair.
And interestingly, when Darryl Littlejohn's home was searched, one thing was very obvious, that new carpet had recently been laid in the house, and it was red, and it appeared to be the same color as the samples. They also found a coat, a woman's coat, that was made of mink fur. And finally they found a coat that had a collar that was rabbit fur, and it was dyed rabbit fur in what appeared to be a similar color to the rabbit fur that they had found on the body. It is the combination of finding these three things together, both on the body and in the apartment, that give one more belief that we're on the right track here and shows a connection between Darrell Littlejohn or his house and the murder of Imette St Guillen.
That's a huge relief because all the work we've done, constant 12, 15, 20-hour days, trying to help this girl and help this girl's family, it was a huge, huge relief because we knew we were on the right track.
The problem, of course, in this case from the beginning was the evidence was getting better and better and better. That Darrell Littlejohn wrapped that body, had taped around the blanket or bedspread. In other words, he clearly was responsible based upon the phone records and the DNA, and now this DNA of the brother. There was no doubt whatsoever, to me in any reasonable person's mind, that he was responsible for the disposing of that body. But that didn't necessarily mean that he was the killer.
So the difficulty remained, a substantial body of evidence, but no proof of the murder.
We were able to place him based on his cell phone records, but we were not able to connect her with him at that point.
Were you working that night?
Yes, I was.
Did you see Imette St Guillen at the bar?
At the end of the night, yes.
He did make an admission which helped me because I did not have him saying, yes, I'm the one that walked her out of the Falls bar. That's the last I saw of her.
Did somebody ask you to escort her out?
Yes. It was close to closing time. All the other patrons had left the bar, and I was asked to escort her out.
Did you do that?
Yes.
Now he's putting himself with her, the last person with her.
Did you kill Imette St Guillen?
No, I did not.
Then, the media coverage of the case unwittingly played another significant role in the investigation.
This case, the death of Imette St Guillen, had developed tremendous notoriety in New York City. It just grew in intensity to the point where local TV reporters were hanging out outside the Falls bar when we did the search warrant, and they showed up in front of Littlejohn's house when we did that search warrant. And one of the stations in New York, the CBS affiliate Channel 2, actually was doing their live, either 5 or 6 p.m. broadcast from in front of Littlejohn's house. It was being broadcast live, but the person that watching it live of significance was Shania Woodard. The reporter was speaking live on camera with the lights on the scene. And in the background of the house, in the driveway next to the house, she saw a van that was parked in that driveway. And that van, she immediately recognized as the van used by her kidnapper, her abductor. And she immediately called her detective that was working on her case and reported it.
In October 2005, Shia Woodward had been walking home from York College in Queens.
A van pulled up. A person got out of the van who she believed was in law enforcement.
When she got stopped by him, he said that he was a U.S. Marshal. He put her in handcuffs. She was going to get arrested. And when she got in the van, they started driving away, and she kicked the van open.
And the van screeched to a stop. The driver of that van got out and pulled her back into the van and drove off again. By that time, she was absolutely convinced this was not law enforcement at all, that she was being abducted and that her life was on the line. And when she had a second opportunity to escape from the van, she did. And the van was in full motion. She opened that door and rolled out of a moving van, which ultimately, I think, saved her life.
He stopped the van, but people came to help her, and she started screaming, and he takes off.
The police were called immediately. She told her story to them. The detective came and uncuffed her handcuffs and did so in a way attempting to preserve the evidence that might be on it, which was great because it turned out to be very significant, that handcuff. The handcuff that Shania Woodard had been wearing contained a mixture of Darrell Littlejohn's DNA and her DNA. There were other victims of sexual assault or attempted sexual assault that were looked at, and there was one in Queens that occurred within a few days of Shania Woodard's abduction.
A few days later, also in the Queens area, a Japanese woman, Maki Shibata, had been abducted in much the same way.
Maki Shibata was someone who, same thing, someone impressed upon themselves that they were law enforcement. They put her in a van, they take her to a location, they sexually assault her. So she was not fortunate enough to escape. She was sexually assaulted.
When she had been, what I would characterize as being dumped on the street after she was raped and abused, the perpetrator, whoever that was, had kept her clothing and given her some random clothing to wear when they dumped her on the street.
Police already had the clue they needed.
Once this Littlejohn case developed, a supervisor at the lab said, you know, we've got to go back and look at that shirt again. They took the collar of the t-shirt that she had been given and was wearing, and they scraped it and scraped it and scraped it, trying to get some dead cells off of there, some dead molecules, some DNA. And when they did that, they found a full profile of DNA. And the full profile turned out to be Darrell Littlejohn's mother.
Why would that DNA be there but for the fact that Darrell Littlejohn had been the one to give it to her after he took her clothes after sexually assaulting her?
I knew it was a very strong case because the DNA went both ways, something I didn't have in my case. I did not have Imette's DNA anywhere on any property of Littlejohn. Here, the Queens DA had his DNA on the cuffs she was found in and her DNA on a seat from his van. Maki Shibata's crime, in at least a limited way, not to prove that he raped her, but to prove someone very similar to him acted in a way very similar to the attacker of Imette St Guillen, and therefore was the same person, Darrell Littlejohn. And therefore he was not merely the person who disposed of the body, but he was in fact the killer.
It placed her, what we believe was in the house where he probably had taken Imette St Guillen and committed the crimes against her. But for Shania Woodard escaping, she probably was en route to that house as well.
It was just getting worse by the day, every victim we found. And there could be more victims out there that we don't know about, that never either had the courage to come forward or no evidence was found that we could test against him.
When Littlejohn appeared in court, he was restrained and respectable.
I don't know what you would imagine a predator looking like, because again, you walked in the courtroom, he's sitting there, he's dressed nice, he's wearing glasses. Again, I don't know what face you would put on a predator, but I know that he was a predator.
He tried to look, I don't know how to explain it, not innocent, but you know, he's dressed in a nicer shirt, he's wearing glasses. I don't even know if he needs glasses. He's trying to portray himself like, I'm not the type of person that would do something like this. And that's smart of him to do that, but it's my job to show everyone on the jury that that's not the person that you see in front of you.
He expressed no remorse whatsoever, none. His position from the start to the finish was, you know, prove my guilt, that I'm not saying anything.
If someone thought they were going to get caught, you're not committing the crime. So every criminal that commits a crime think, I'm not going to get caught. Darrell Littlejohn is no different. He did this because he didn't think he was going to get caught. He didn't think it was going to come back to him, and he was wrong, thankfully.
I did see Darrell Littlejohn in the courtroom while I testified, and I did not notice any sign of remorse from him. His face was very straight and I would say almost emotionless the entire time.
By now, detectives were in no doubt as to what they believed had happened the night Imette had been murdered.
I think Darrell Littlejohn did what he had done before. He saw a vulnerable young female, saw an opportunity to take advantage of her, and he did so.
So I'm not going to stand here and tell you that he abducted her from the bar. But I believe that. I believe that because of the other 2 abductions done in such a similar manner.
I think they left that bar that night. He took her back to Queens, where he had taken Maki Shibata. He violated her in the worst way imaginable, murdered her, and then he dumped her body in Brooklyn.
Hair and fiber alone is never enough to convict somebody. I would not have known about Maki Shibata or about Shania Woodard without DNA. Without the collective DNA in this case, I would not have been anywhere. Darryl Littlejohn would be walking the streets right now. There's no question about that.
But circumstantial forensics had contributed to making the case watertight.
This case was interesting for a lot of reasons. The thing I liked best about it was the way the circumstantial evidence came together to paint a picture that I thought was fairly compelling in a way that isn't very common. Specifically, the fact that the dead brother, long dead brother's semen is on this blanket, that his mother's pubic hair is on it, that he gets a phone call that he doesn't want right at the wrong time. This guy was not going to make any phone calls while he was dumping this woman's body, but this woman happened to call him at exactly the right time to make my case. That's cool. See, that's what I like, is the thing about a circumstantial case. You know, if you have a case that depends on a witness, they can say, well, that witness is mistaken or lying. And even if you have 2 or 3, they're mistaken or they're lying. Or if you have a case that's based upon a confession, it's, well, the police intimidated him and caused him to falsely confess. But the beauty of a circumstantial case is that it comes from multiple sources that cannot be collectively refuted. And if you assemble the picture clearly enough, there isn't any defense. That's what I loved about this case. I love circumstantial cases. I love this one particular.
I would say the DNA solidified the case 1,000%. It could be proven in such a way that nobody else could have committed this crime. Nobody else could have swapped out their blood for yours. It's just so intricate, and it's a fingerprint of your blood.
For me personally, in looking at the evidence, I think finding the other victims' DNA on those car seats really was also pivotal, in that it showed a pattern of crime and a pattern of violence that he had done, and really spoke volumes to what the police were trying to do in getting him, in jail and put away for life.
Darryl Littlejohn was sentenced to life without parole for the rape and murder of Imette St Guillen.
Sentencing was a relief to know that he's never gonna step foot outside of a jail the rest of his life. And there's no opportunity or no loophole that he can ever hurt somebody else again.
But there have been a number of ways in which Imette has been honored. An effort to ensure her death was not in vain.
In spite of that opportunity being taken away from her in life, in death, she's given so much. She's been able to help so many. There was a scholarship established in her name as a result of this incident.
Every year, we award a scholarship in Imette's name to a graduate student studying criminal justice, who in their own way is pursuing their version of what was Imette's hope for herself.
You know, a young 23 or 24-year-old woman who never got a chance to succeed in her life, which I think she was destined to do so in one way or another. Yet, all those people who benefited from those scholarships will remember who she was, and that's kind of cool.
That feels like we've done something small in proportion to this tragedy, but that hopefully it is a way of honoring her. Our city council passed a law called Imette's Law that requires that bars do background checks on their bouncers, basically. Had that been in place, we can imagine that this man might not have been hired. So we did try in many ways to turn this very painful event and the loss of a member of our community into something that would improve our city and make it safe for our students.
Imette St Guillen tragically could not help many in life because she was murdered and that opportunity was taken away from her. She's helped so many through her death.